Most marketing is a waste of money because it follows the rules of the board, rather than the psychology of the bold. Welcome back, everyone. I am so glad you're here. Grab your coffee, maybe a notebook, or if you're driving, just turn the volume up a little bit, because today we are going to perform a heist. We are diving deep into a book that is essentially a manifesto for theft. But not the illegal kind. We are talking about intellectual theft. We are talking about Steal These Ideas by Steve Cohn. And let me set the stage for you here. Marketing, branding, advertising, whatever you want to call it, is usually taught in this very dry, academic vacuum. You go to university, you learn the 4Ps. You look at charts, you look at spreadsheets, and you treat human beings like data points. But then you have Steve Cohn. Steve isn't an academic. He's a heavyweight. He's a guy who has spent 30 years in the trenches at places like Citigroup, Fidelity, American Express. He's managed global brands across 100 countries. And his central premise is refreshingly arrogant and incredibly generous at the same time. He basically says, look, it takes 2 generations to master the craft of marketing through trial and error. You don't have that kind of time. So, just steal my ideas. Steal the things that I have already proven work. So, for the next hour or so, we are going to deconstruct the brain of Steve Cohn. We are going to look at why most marketing is invisible trash, and how you can make yours magnetic. Let's start with the core philosophy. Cohn argues that we are living in a world of absolute chaos. Traffic jams, noise, smartphones buzzing, emails pinging. The human brain is under siege. In that environment, good is not enough. Okay is invisible. To actually work, any piece of communication must satisfy 3 specific elements simultaneously. He calls these the 3 secrets, but really, they are the 3 pillars of survival. Number 1, attractiveness or appeal. It has to be magnetic. It has to physically stop you from turning the page or scrolling past. Number 2, freshness. It cannot be a cliché. It has to be something the eye hasn't seen 1,000 times. Number 3, motivation to act. It has to give you a reason to stop your life and buy right now. Now, that sounds simple, right? But think about the last time you saw a bank advertisement. What did you see? I bet you saw a middle-aged couple, wearing beige sweaters, walking hand in hand on a beach. Right. We've all seen it. It's visual wallpaper. It means nothing. It tells you nothing about the bank. It just tells you that the marketing department has a subscription to a stock photo site. Or think about car ads. A shiny car on a wet, winding road. Or a burger chain showing a perfect, steaming hamburger. Cohn calls this lazy marketing. It fails the freshness test immediately. It's invisible because it's expected. So, how do you fix it? Well, Cohn says you steal from the greats. And he gives us this incredible example from 1913. It's the Ernest Shackleton ad. Now, if you know history, you know Shackleton was trying to recruit men for an expedition to Antarctica. It was going to be hell. If a modern HR department wrote that ad, it would say something like, exciting opportunity for travel, competitive salary, team environment. Shackleton didn't do that. He wrote an ad that was only 37 words long. Listen to this text. He wrote, men wanted for hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful. Honor and recognition in case of success. That is magnetic. Why? Because it's brutally honest. It breaks the pattern. It offers something that money can't buy, glory. It's fresh, because nobody advertises death and danger. And the result? 5,000 men applied for roughly 50 spots. That is the power of breaking the cliché. Let's fast forward a few decades to the 1950s. Cohn talks about his own father, who wrote marketing letters for Hugh Hefner at Playboy. Now, imagine you are a man in the 1950s. You get a letter in the mail asking you to subscribe to a magazine. Usually, that letter comes from the editor or the circulation department. It's boring. It's corporate. So, what did they do? They stole the idea of personal connection. They wrote the letters from the perspective of a Playboy bunny. They included photos of the bunny and her friends. The letter was signed by the bunny. Suddenly, it's not a transaction, it's a relationship. It's appeal, in its most primal form. Or take the Rolling Stone example from the 70s. Hunter S. Thompson, the gonzo journalist, wrote a renewal letter. Now, renewal letters are usually polite. Dear Sir, your subscription is expiring. Thompson wrote a letter claiming that the magazine was his only source of legal income, and if the reader didn't renew, he'd end up in a slum drinking nitrous oxide. He literally wrote, "I know where you live," in huge letters on the envelope. Was it professional? No. Was it magnetic? Yes. It was funny, shocking, and fresh. It cut through the noise. Now you might be thinking, okay, that's great for Playboy or Rolling Stone, but I run a serious business. But here is where Cohn pivots. He argues that we need to fundamentally rethink why we advertise. Most people think advertising is just about getting new customers. That's it. But Cohn says, no, there are actually 6 hidden reasons to advertise, and if you ignore them, you're missing half the value. First, you advertise to motivate the army, your internal staff. Think about it. If you work for a company and you see a cool, powerful ad for your employer on TV or online, you feel proud. You walk taller. Cohn suggests showing ads to your staff before the public sees them. It builds morale. Second, you advertise to reassure current customers. This is huge. When you buy a BMW, and then you see a cool BMW ad, you feel smart. You think, I made the right choice. A lot of so-called new business is actually existing customers buying more because the advertising reminded them why they liked you in the first place. Third, obviously, is acquiring new customers. But Cohn is very specific here. You need a call to action. A phone number, a website, a deadline. Don't just be pretty, be useful. Fourth, and this is a sneaky one, you advertise to recruit competitor talent. If your marketing is bold and exciting, the best people working for your boring rival are going to call you. They want to play on the winning team. Fifth, it generates PR. The media loves to talk about great ads. If you do something wild, the news will cover it for free. And sixth, building brand awareness. Just being famous. So, when you look at that list, you realize that a boring ad doesn't just fail to sell a product, it fails to inspire your staff. It fails to scare your competitors, and it fails to get you free press. The cost of being boring is astronomically high. Let's look at an industry that was notoriously boring, airlines in the late 70s. Cohn calls them buses in the sky. It was a commodity. You get in a tube, you fly, you get out. Business travelers were miserable. Then, someone had a fresh idea: frequent flyer programs. Now, here is the lesson on stealing. Pan Am was the last major airline to get into the loyalty game. They were late. In most industries, being late is a death sentence. But Pan Am launched WorldPass. They looked at what everyone else was doing, and they just made their appeal better. They made the rewards richer. They made the tiers more exclusive. Experts believe that program alone saved Pan Am from bankruptcy for an extra decade. The lesson? You don't have to be first. You just have to be more magnetic than the guy who was first. Now, I want to transition into the second chunk of this book, because this is where Cohn gets into the nitty-gritty of execution. We've talked about the philosophy, now let's talk about the money. There is this prevailing myth in business that cheaper is better, especially in direct marketing. If you can send an email for free, why send a letter? If you can send a postcard for pennies, why send a package? Cohn destroys this myth with the story of the $7 letter. This is the 1983 GOP fundraising campaign. The Republican Senate committee was doing what everyone else did, sending out mass-produced, computer-generated letters that cost about 50 cents each. They looked like junk mail. They felt like junk mail. And they got a junk mail response rate, maybe 5%. Cohn comes in and says, "Stop." He convinces them to spend $7 per package. In 1983, that is a fortune. They sent these packages to 200,000 donors. But look at what they sent. It was a FedEx-style envelope, sent via priority mail. Inside, there were 2 pages of embossed gold leaf stationery. Not cheap printer paper. Gold leaf. And a large color photo of Ronald Reagan. And here is the kicker, a personalized, handwritten note. Now, obviously, Reagan didn't write 200,000 notes. They had a team in Massachusetts replicate the handwriting perfectly. Why go to this trouble? Because when you hold that package, it feels heavy. It feels expensive. It feels like the President of the United States actually cares about you. It treated the donor like a VIP, not a statistic. The result? A 40% response rate. They raised over $2 million. They crushed the Democrats that year. The lesson here is high-value personalization. If you treat people like they matter, the return on investment justifies the upfront cost. Cheap marketing signals a cheap product. Expensive, thoughtful marketing signals value. This leads us into the concept of archetypes. How do you trigger an emotion? Cohn gives us 3 masterclasses in emotional manipulation, and I use that word neutrally. First, authority and fear. American Express travelers' checks. For 25 years, they used Carl Malden. Now, Malden had played a police officer on TV. He had that gravelly voice, that nose, that look of authority. The ads were simple. Someone loses their money on vacation. Disaster. Malden steps in. This could happen to you. It was pure fear, resolved by the authority of American Express. They held 75% of the market because they owned the emotion of security. Second contrast. The mean, Joe Green ad for Coca-Cola. You remember this? Huge, terrifying football player, limping off the field. A little kid offers him a Coke. The contrast between the scary giant and the innocent kid is what makes it work. When Joe Green smiles and tosses the kid his jersey, it melts your heart. The message? Coke equals happiness. Even for a scary giant. Third, humor and tactility. Charmin toilet paper. Toilet paper is boring. It's a utility. How do you market it? They created Mr. Whipple. A grocery store manager obsessed with stopping women from squeezing the Charmin. It was ridiculous. It was annoying. But it was genius. Why? Because it made the customer think about the softness of the product. It made you want to touch it. It took a boring product and gave it a physical sensation. Cohn is telling us, don't just describe your product. Find the emotion. Are you selling fear? Are you selling warmth? Are you selling the desire to touch? And speaking of boring industries, let's talk about finance again. In the late 90s, Cohn was at Fidelity. Investing is dry. It's numbers. It's scary. Cohn decided to disrupt it by bringing in Peter Lynch, a legendary fund manager, but pairing him with comedians. Lily Tomlin. Don Rickles. Think about that combination. A genius investor and a comedian. It made the invisible product of investment management feel accessible. It made it human. It wasn't just a chart, it was a conversation. The phones rang off the hook because it was different. And that word, different, is the heart of branding. Cohn takes us back to the etymology of the word sincere. It comes from the Latin sincere, meaning without wax. In ancient Rome, dishonest marble merchants would use wax to fill in the cracks of bad stone. Honest merchants would mark their stone signs "Sir," without wax. It was a guarantee of quality. It was the first brand promise. Cohn says that today, your brand needs to be that simple. In fact, he has the one-word rule. The greatest brands can be defined by a single word. USA? Freedom. BMW? Performance. FedEx? Reliability. Volvo? Safety. If you can't define your brand in one word, you don't have a brand, you have a mess. You need to be unique. You need a unique selling proposition or USP. And this brings us to the third chunk of the book, which is really about how you find that big idea. Cohn says finding a USP isn't about sitting in a boardroom with a whiteboard for 3 days. It's about observation. He tells you to carry a pen and paper everywhere, to weddings, to the gym, everywhere. Because the ideas don't come when you force them. He suggests a strategy called contrarian positioning. This is brilliant. Look at your competitors. See how they define themselves. Then, go to the exact opposite end of the spectrum. If everyone else is selling low calories, you sell great taste. If everyone else is selling luxury, you sell value. If everyone else is selling speed, you sell safety. He gives this great example of a dentist. Most dentists market themselves with pictures of teeth or chairs. Scary stuff. Cohn wrote a line for a dentist that said, "You come first. Your teeth come second." Boom. Differentiation. It says, "I care about you as a human being, not just a set of molars." It humanizes a clinical service. But once you have that idea, you have to be careful not to overload the customer. This is the rule of 3. Cohn argues that even if your product has 100 amazing features, you must only talk about 3. The human brain cannot handle more. If you list 10 things, the customer remembers 0. If you list 3, like ease of use, reliability, and service, they remember all 3. You have to edit yourself ruthlessly. And finally, let's talk about the messenger. We touched on this with the Playboy Bunny and Karl Malden, but Cohn goes deeper in the third section. He talks about the power of brand representatives. We are hardwired, biologically and historically, to follow leaders. We look for faces. We trust people, not corporations. That's why a spokesperson is so powerful. Cohn talks about John Houseman for Smith Barney. You might remember the line, delivered in that stuffy, aristocratic voice. "They earn it the old-fashioned way, they earn it." That line stuck for 20 years. Why? Because Houseman embodied the old money archetype. He looked like he knew where the money was buried. Or look at Colonel Sanders. He wasn't just a mascot, he was the founder. He was a real person. That builds trust. Cohn outlines a rigorous framework for this. You can't just pick a celebrity because they are famous. They have to embody the values of the brand. Karl Malden worked for Amex because he projected authority. If they had hired a comedian, it wouldn't have worked for Traveler's Checks. You don't want a comedian protecting your money, you want a cop. So, let's pull this all together. What is Steve Cohn really telling us in Steal These Ideas? He's telling us that the safe path is the dangerous path. If you do what everyone else is doing, if you use the cliché stock photos, if you write the polite corporate letters, if you try to save money by being cheap, you will be invisible. And in a noisy world, invisibility is death. He's inviting you to look at history, at Shackleton, at Playboy, at the GOP, at Pan Am, and treat their strategies like a buffet. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to take the wheel that works and put it on your car. You need to find your appeal to stop the traffic. You need freshness to keep them looking. You need motivation to make them act. You need to differentiate, whether that's through a $7 letter or a funny mascot. And you need to simplify it down to one word, one feeling, one face. Marketing is not about spreadsheets. It is about psychology. It is about emotion. It is about the sincere, the truth without the wax. So, here is my challenge to you today. Take one piece of marketing you are working on right now. Maybe it's an email, a website landing page, or a pitch deck. Look at it. Is it invisible? Is it a couple walking on the beach? If it is, tear it up. Steal a page from Steve Cohn. Be dangerous like Shackleton. Be personal like the Playboy Bunny. Be authoritative like Karl Malden. Stop being boring. Start being magnetic. Thanks for listening. Go out there and steal something great.